Thank you for joining this Spark the World event, the Latin Tech Experience Founder versus Corporate versus Venture Capital. Yeah, we're gonna get started. I will let our panelists, Aurelia and Ricardo, introduce themselves a little bit so that you all, I'm gonna be admitting people in, okay, at the same time. So, but please, um, Aurelia, if you can start by giving us an introduction of yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Glad to see you here. I'm going to do my intro, but if I can ask everybody just to put in chat why you're here and what you want to learn in the next 30 minutes or so, that would be great. It'll help us to kind of format our comments and questions and hopefully help you get the most you can out of our discussion tonight. I've been in and around the tech and venture ecosystem for 25 years. I started I did my law school in Silicon Valley, and then I started the practice of law on the West Coast during the dot-com boom and bust. And for those of you who are young enough not to know what the dot-com boom and bust is, which I have heard before, it is when a whole bunch of tech companies were founded in the late 90s, and there were all sorts of websites that were founded, and everybody thought they were going to get a gazillion dollars by investing in a website in that period of time, and was writing venture and angel deals from the legal side for investors and founders in that ecosystem, and helping underrepresented founders get funded, actually, which you can imagine at that point in time, there weren't a whole bunch of founders that look like us. Went in-house to a Fortune 500 in the early 2000s, was on the buy side, M&A and IP transactions for about another 15 years or so. So I practiced law for 20 years. I left the practice of law, started my own company. At the same time, I got much more active in angel investing. I ran a podcast for several years with two other friends of mine about making the venture ecosystem more transparent and accessible. And I was also co-founding an angel group of women investing in women, which I still co-run and sit on the board of. And then decided I wanted to be a formal professional investor, worked for a Series A fund for a couple of years. Now I came over to VIPC, which does pre-seed and seed stage investing. And I also run their fund of funds program. Could go into a lot more on all of that, but that gives a high level. So I don't see anybody putting in the chat what you want to get out of tonight. So we'd really love for you guys to tell us what you want to hear, why you're here. If you want to know what it's like to be in corporate, what it's like to be in tech, really would help us. Okay, over to you, Ricardo.
Just want to second that. Please write questions. We really are going to be operating from a vacuum if we don't know what's on y'all's minds. But for a high-level introduction, so my name is Ricardo Rafael Corona Moreno. People could just call me Ricardo. It's fine. You don't have to use a proper accent even. But if I'm in a really, really toxic space, I force people to use my first name and my middle name. So, it kind of tells you the privilege I'm coming with. And I give that context because, I spent most of my childhood figuring out how to get into a top-tier school. So as early as about 6th grade, I knew I wanted to go to Harvard, Stanford, or MIT. Very granular. By the time I got to 7th grade, I knew I wanted to work in China. Don't even ask me how that happened. It just happens. Some people just have those abilities to connect the dots. So long story short, the point of inflection for me was that my senior year at Stanford, because I got into Stanford ultimately, I was the president of the Asia Pacific Student Entrepreneurship Society, which stands for ACES. So I'm Mexican. 100%. Mom and both came here without documents. My mom swam the Rio Grande. My dad crossed the border in Tijuana. Longer story there. But somehow a Mexican kid became the president of the Asian Business Club. 8 years prior to that, Gary Tan, the current president of Y Combinator, was also the president of that same club. So I give that context because that's how these things work, right? You build career narratives around patterns, pattern matching. That's what structures someone's entrepreneurship journey as a founder, as a venture capitalist. At my end, I chose to do material science and engineering as my degree for undergrad. Kind of went towards a PhD because, I wanted to make my family proud, wanted to be the first of my family to get a doctorate. Pretty big bar. And within about maybe 2 or 3 months of doing it, I realized, hey, this is not great because I have half of my brain can work towards business, either half towards science, and I'm not using my business brain. So I dropped out of that program, and my first job out of college was doing corporate strategy at a manufacturing conglomerate called Flextronics. So Flextronics is in the same sphere of influence as Foxconn, as Jabil. They're basically a manufacturing company. These companies are also known as the initiatives or the engines that essentially outsource everything from the States elsewhere. Just for context, right? That's how deep in the pipeline I was of capitalism and extraction. And I give that context because my job since has been to figure out how to rectify my mistakes since sixth grade. And my mistake was figuring out how to make myself successful based on the patterns that I observed without caring about how toxic or uncomfortable they are. So left corporate strategy, became an entrepreneur, became a founder, went to YC, went to Techstars, made a company that was building biomaterials in Mexico, did venture capital investments in Beijing for artificial intelligence companies. It can go on for a while. Over the past maybe 2 or 3 years, I focused a lot in the nonprofit space. So I was a senior director of entrepreneurial inclusion at MLT. MLT is basically the world's largest nonprofit for people of color. I'm sure many of you are actually MLT fellows in one way or the other, or have heard of it, if nothing else. And my job was to get folks like us into Techstars and YC. So Sparc, Laurel is one example. He's the founder of Sparc, and I worked with him on this Techstars and YC application, and he made it. And so I had a great experience, but I realized, maybe I'm missing something here. And what I realized was that the nonprofit space doesn't really challenge you the way capitalism is designed to do. It doesn't challenge you because nonprofits get most of their money from donations, from the goodwill of people, and goodwill comes and goes. The more in the hype cycle you are, the more you might get. The lower you are, the less you're not getting the real input you need. So I left that, and I became an artificial intelligence residency fellow for a nonprofit called Colorwave. So I applied as a fellow to essentially reskill myself around AI. And so I'm wrapping up that program now. But my goal was to really figure out, hey, what comes next? What do I need to know to be resilient for the AI future? Because I've been thinking about this for the past 15 years. Definitely for the past 10 years. And it's caused me massive anxiety for the past 2 years, right? So finally, for the first time in about 10 years, I feel like I have a grasp on things. And maybe later on in the call, we'll talk about my next steps, but that's a bit about myself.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Those are some great introductions. So whoever joined afterwards, we're asking you guys to tell us, what are you doing here? What do you want to get from this conversation that we're having so that we can better, accommodate our responses to that. And apparently, we are joined here by some students. So for example, Angelina and Kaylin, they are both interested in you guys, your journey throughout your career, how you broke into tech, what has been your experience being a Latino in the field specifically, how you overcome challenges like the imposter syndrome, and if you know any opportunities for summer internships, apparently. So yeah, I'll let you guys start with that. And yeah, maybe I can jump in a little.
Elsa, do you want to do an introduction before we jump into the answers?
Sure. I have a way shorter introduction. I've been in the VC space and startup space for the past 13 years. At first, I started by working at a VC fund in San Francisco, and then I joined a super early stage startup. And after that, I started my own venture capital fund, which I have had for the past 8 years. And well, my fund is 12 years. The tenure is 12 years. So right now I'm sketching the exit strategy for all 16 startups that we invested in. And I'm doing my MBA. I currently live in Durham since I'm doing my MBA at Duke's Fuqua University Business School. Yeah.
Well, I guess I should start the answer since you people are asking how to break into tech. I came in through the side door, right? Like, so I'm not actually a tech traditionally, right? My undergraduate degree is not in a technical field. I came in as a lawyer. And I got exposure to a lot of different kinds of tech because I did IP transactions. So we were looking at everything from, and I worked for a tech company that did a lot of software development, systems integration, helped to run NCI, which is National Cancer Institute. So came at tech from the side. So I can tell you about my son who went to undergrad, also got a liberal arts undergrad major like I did, but then subsequently went to a coding boot camp and just fell in love with coding. And now he's a software developer and has a tech job. But if you're not a coder, and don't want to go to law school, which I would not recommend, by the way, I would say figure out like what part of tech really interests you, because there's so many different ways to get into tech. And Ricardo was just talking about, how he got into AI, which is different than how he did material science, right? So Ricardo, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about actually getting into tech as opposed to my kind of side door window hop in the tech world.
Sure. So I'm going to give two different answers. I'm going to give my journey and my brother's journey. So I have a sibling who's 12 years younger than me. And I give this context because I'm the first in my family to graduate from elementary school, right? And so I put a lot of effort into crafting my brother's narrative to make sure that when he applied to top tier schools, it was going to be easy. So I give that context because my material science journey was very different, right? I find materials fundamentally beautiful. To this date, it's one of the most calming, soothing concepts. If I want to relax, I just go read papers and articles about material science. It just happens to not be a very dynamic field. It grows slowly because we need more innovation. We need more of a high throughput system. It doesn't exist yet. We don't have those technologies. They're still about 10 years away. Google DeepMind is going pretty far in that process. And for context, I almost worked in London for Google DeepMind back in 2016. And that was right after Trump once. I was ready to run away. I was this close. But what kept me in the States was my little brother, right? And so my path was very structured. It was, I know what I want. Here's how I can get it. But there was very little to it. There was very little structure to it. So it was very unemotional. Whereas my brother's journey was, hey, I can tutor you and mentor you since you were a child. There's this program at Stanford called Symbolic Systems. It's a combination of cognitive neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, computer science. And so he's able to really explore multiple fields, multiple industries, and it becomes almost a universal acceptor for folks who might have an interest in tech, but are not going to be pure coders. And that's a blessing because we live in a reality now where pure coding is not going to really exist in the traditional sense. It's not going to be this competitive market. I mean, y'all have seen that space fall crazy apart. My brother is immune to that disruption. I saw that happening about 15 years ago, right? And I've been structuring his life so that he doesn't have to deal with that. Now, that's not the experience most people will have, but I mentioned that context because, to Aurelia's point, it's always side doors. Us as humans do not have access to enough information density to actually structure a path that is a correct one at all times. So our best option is to be versatile. So create a system in which we understand what's occurring, we're up to date, but we understand that the systems that are algorithmic and capitalistic will be far ahead of us. So how do you build a narrative that's resilient enough, that's structured enough, but resilient enough to kind of adapt based on your passions? Because that passion is what will keep you going when you get laid off, when you have a bad experience with a potential boss, a professor, when you get a D or a C minus in the class that you thought you were set for, and it turns out that the issue was just a not so great curriculum, right? It's about figuring out what your passions look like and how they fit. So I guess I'll pause and leave you guys with one word. It's called Ikigai, Ikigai. It's a Japanese word. It's basically an idea that represents making sure that you find the sweet spot between your interests, what the world actually needs, what they'll pay for, and where you can see yourself going pragmatically as a more resilient method, because there's so many different pathways. So I'll pause there.
I put a book recommendation. It's called Designing Your Life. And it's, man, I feel like our whole conversation is around Stanford, but it's by two Stanford professors. And it's a great book, just basically talking about, failing forward, talking to people about what they do, figuring out how to get the job you want. And how you get the job you want is to talk to people about what they do, to figure out what you might want to actually do. A lot of people used to come to me and be like, hey, I want to go to law school. And I'd be like, don't do it. But also because a lot of people don't know what you actually do day to day, right? You see a TV show and you think, oh, I want to be a lawyer because I want to be in the courtroom every day saying these like brilliant like soliloquies. Well, that's not what lawyers actually do. So go talk to folks about what they do every day and figure out if that's what you want to do. and then you can figure out how to get there, right? Because you'll talk to 100 people about what they do, and next thing you know, they're like, wait a minute, why are you talking to me? What do you do? Like, do you want an internship here? So go do that. And then I want to also say just really quickly about imposter syndrome, and then I'd love for Elsa to jump in and kind of say what she wants to say too. Everybody's got imposter syndrome all the time. You never grow out of that. Like I'm around, like, I was an angel investor and I thought I wasn't good enough to be a real VC. And now I'm a real VC. And now like I'm a fund of funds manager. And then I'm not as good as other LPs. And then I'm better than other LPs, but I'm not as good as like pension fund. Everyone's got imposter syndrome all the time. But guess what? We all put our pants on the same freaking way. And I tell my daughter every morning when she's like, well, what if they don't like me? Who the F cares? Like somebody's never going to like you. Somebody's going to like you. Just do you and let it go. Keep moving. That's my
So real quick on that book, I actually read one of the first drafts for it because I know the professors, and I got interviewed for it as well. So strongly recommend it. They did like massive improvements, and I gave my brother the first copy too that they made.
But it's also a brilliant way to get your next job. Like whatever that job is, whether it's an internship, whether you want to break into tech, whether you want a job in VC, whether you want to move to London or China, like, yeah.
Those are some great advices. I want to echo what they just said. Definitely talk to people about the kind of roles that you're thinking about because, like, yeah, obviously, not everyone in tech is a coder, right? Like, you need project managers, you need lawyers, you need all these different type of people. So, yeah, we don't. Yeah, as you said, we all come through like the window or like a small crack, maybe. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, echoing that, just talk to everyone that you want to apply for a job like that. And so yeah, so about an MBA, yeah, I love it. I really love it. I know it's especially in the Bay Area, it's a controversial topic, but I adore it. I knew I wanted to do an MBA since 8 years ago, and I decided to start Toro Ventures, my venture capital fund, instead of doing the MBA. But right now, it worked again. Like there was good timing for me and my family to think about coming to the US to do an MBA. And yeah, we took it and I do not regret it. I'm in my second year. It's one of the most amazing experiences I've had ever. Yeah, we're super happy. So I recommend it for any age, actually. Like my husband did it when he was 26 and I'm 35. So like it's a very different experience that we're both having, obviously. And yeah, any age works. You take it sometimes with more maturity, or sometimes this is what's going to help you grow. But it's definitely a very transformative period that I like a lot. How was my process to apply? I guess it's similar to everyone else. It's just while I was applying, I discovered which schools were the right fit for me just by the application process. Like even the essay questions that they're asking you and all this and everything in the application process just makes you feel where you actually belong, which is easiest, which talks to you is more. And then yeah, that's how in the application process I realized that Fuqua was the school for me. And yeah, I didn't apply. I didn't end up applying to any others because I only wanted Fuqua after I understood more what it entailed. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about a topic you mentioned, Ricardo. I think it's very important, and we might be able to ask Laurel to take this out of the recording, but yes, Trump. There's a lot. Yeah, so we'll take this out of the recording, but yeah, there's a lot, like
You can keep it in the recording from my standpoint. I'll say what I want to say with or without the recording, but go ahead.
but something similar happened to me actually. That's when I was trying when I was studying for the GMAT and trying to come to the US for my MBA. Also, Trump won, and I was devastated. I was like, no, I don't even want to do it. Like this is so. For me, it was like a big hit. Like thinking that Latin people are not welcomed in the States. So it was something for me. And yeah, again, like if you think about it, maybe the possibility of him winning again, like, and there's so much endorsement in the Bay Area. There's a lot more open endorsement in the Bay Area today than there was 8 years ago, and it's a little bit, just nerve-wracking. So I don't know. What do you guys think about it? How do you cope with this? Are there any new, fresh perspectives that you want to give us on the subject?
So I think for me, since I was the one that mentioned the word, I'll take it on. It's been very personal in my life. It's actually been devastating. My mom turned out to be a QAnon, Trump voting anti-vaxxer, despite being someone who quite literally swam the Rio Grande to come here without documents. And she ended up passing away from the Delta variant because she thought that science wasn't real. The vaccine would make her atheist. And the tragedy of it all is that she caught COVID-19, dropping my brother off at Stanford, despite all the trying to convince them to not do that, right? So what the process has really done for me, from like a more reflective standpoint, is understanding how little culture actually matters. It's really weird to say that, right? Because a lot of us really define ourselves as being Hispanic, being a commonality, but it's such a small subset now of the human experience, right? We live in a robotic age. We live in an algorithmic system where this is just one piece of data in a bigger picture. So culture is getting erased at scale. It's being done intentionally, right? People are figuring out what makes this human operate at a baseline level, their fears, their insecurities, and they're hacking them, right? And if they can use culture to do that, they will. If they can use any other means to do so, they will also do so. The point is profit. The point is power, right? And that kind of system transcends any one cultural context of ethnicity. So I've tried to move myself away from thinking about race as a unifying feature and having it become more of just a point of information out of a massive cloud of experiences. And again, this is my trauma. This is part of my reaction to what happened in my own family construct, and realizing how, in many ways, I'm not very Hispanic. When I go into Hispanic groups, there's things about me that just stand out. I'm usually the only person of Hispanic background that speaks Mandarin Chinese, that worked in Asia, that's in these spaces. So I kind of understand I'm an outlier, but there's a reason that I am the way I am. And so I try to, pay honor to that while still, speaking Spanish fluently, going to Hispanic events, and kind of spreading my context and my background. So instead of delving into the politics of it all, I think it's just useful to stare at the existential dread of the age we find ourselves in which culture is getting erased at scale.
So Elsa, I want to respond to your question about how I deal with the political situation in the context of kind of how we deal with any political situation, which might also be in companies, right? So like there's like the small p politics and the big P politics, meaning we're always navigating these spaces that were not inherently made for people like us. And I say that with appreciation for what you said, Ricardo, about the fact that like we're all different. We all have these things, and to think that Latinos have kind of one way of embodying Latinidad or whatever that means is a false premise, right? That we all come at who we are and how we embody our experience in different ways. And corporate America is not made for many kinds of diversity of any sort, right? So they want you to comply and compress and figure out how to fit in. And I would say, on the one hand, you want to figure out how to do that. And on the other hand, you want to figure out how to stand out and how to be who you are. Because if you don't do that, then you will be squished into oblivion because nobody cares, right? And I think if we don't hold on to who we are, whether that be a Mandarin speaking Latino whose mom went off the Trump deep end, to like, and I have my own stories around politics. I live just outside of Washington, D.C. So you might imagine that everybody is like thinking and reading and looking at everything, right? Like literally this morning, I'm sharing 2 different articles with one of my really good friends about, oh my God, like the distinction of this political race is going to be around gender, not necessarily race, but it really is about power and privilege and holding on to being able to drive things in certain ways. But that's what companies do too. And I'm a huge believer in capitalism, and I'm super duper uber progressive because I think that those things can live in the same place. But I wanted to say that because there will always be people who are kind of behind the scenes, very selfish and all out for themselves. And you might not know why they believe what they believe or what they believe. And you just have to, hold on to where you want to go with that, because there will, on the other side, be amazing people who help you in your career. I think, quite a bit older than everybody on this call. And I've run into people who are not so great, but there's also just been so many amazing people in my life, including a ton of white guys who have been great mentors for me and have been really strong allies, and not just mentors, but sponsors, meaning using their leveraged power to put me in places where I can move to the next level in my career. And so I want to say that because I don't want it to be an us versus them. It really is a community thing. Also, I think I went all over the place on that, but there you go.
No, you're good. You're good. Thank you for the broad explanation. I guess we can move on to like maybe more again Latin people in tech questions. So like I don't know, what has been your experience in terms of like diversity? Like, have you had to crack ceilings, or do you feel like you are someone that's just there for like DEI purposes, or like filling a bucket, or have you had to hire someone that's just like filling a bucket, or yeah, like how do you see Latin well, yeah, the Latins coming into tech, is it more, is it less? What are you thinking on that?
Given that I worked at a diversity, equity, and inclusion nonprofit, I could probably take this one on just heads first. We're under attack, full stop, right? There's a very intentional movement going on to basically disavow the effectiveness, the need, or the fairness of DEI initiatives. And instead of digging into whether they're fair or not or what's going on, I think it's just valuable to understand that we are being attacked and people are changing. So my previous nonprofit, initially, MLT was entirely centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion around a racial structure, so much so that we included ethnicity, race demarcations on the application itself. Over the past several months, that's changed, right? So MLT no longer actually requires race in the admissions process. So they backed off of that. There's been funds that have been shut down, initiatives that have been shut down. So it's not just Latins or Latinx or Hispanics, it's everyone. It's diversity at scale that's being attacked. That's just the nature of progressivism, right? You have progress, people wake up to the fact that things are changing, they attack, and you move on. And in my mind, it's really just about adapting, right? That's why I keep going to these higher level structures and comments. For me, it used to be in this dimension of operation where DEI was understood. People are moving in a different direction now. So how do we go one abstraction layer higher to understand, okay, what is a true value? What other terms can you use? What other systems are functional? How can you use the previous structures in a rebranded way to be helpful? And again, I know it's a high level strategy suggestion, but I bring that up because it makes sense to focus on the fact that we are being attacked. And it makes sense to focus on ways of overcoming those attacks by going a step higher, but not by not pulling back, but by thinking, what are they missing? What is the true value add that goes beyond the branding and the buzzwords? How do I get access to that? And then how do I get like 20 steps ahead of bigots, of regressives, of people that are selfish? Because those mindsets are hyper selfish, and they tend to be short-term focused. So it's your job as the individual to figure out what's the truth, what's the true pattern, and how do I get there?
3 things. Number 1, read, learn, keep an open mind, keep doing that your entire life. Because you stop learning, you're going to get stuck wherever you are. Number 1. Number 2, bring people up behind you. I absolutely believe that. Every single place that I have been, I've turned around and made sure to sponsor things, do things, support things. I am all about making sure to bring more people into the fold. And that looks like a lot of folks that didn't have the opportunity that I did, which was to to go to some elite schools and do these elite things. So I am a strong believer that just having that brand name behind you can open a lot of doors, but it doesn't protect you from everything. Absolutely, I've been seen as a diversity hire. Absolutely. Despite the fact that I'm like, well, nobody took my law school exams or took the bar for me or did any of these other, right? Like I'm just as good as everybody else, but it's okay. And yes, diversity is completely under attack, and diversity at its core is what we need, right? I'm in finance. The premise of making money and bringing alpha is to diversify your portfolio. Hello. So at its core, we know that this is a good premise. And so it's a little bit silly that there's this attack, but it is good to recognize it and know.
Agreed. I actually think about that so much more than I should. Like, exactly. Like all our premises for in finance is diversify your portfolio, diversify your portfolio. But we don't actually diversify our teams. We don't diversify our corporates. We don't diversify it as much as we should. But we know that money needs to be diversified, which is insane. Okay, so we have 3 more minutes. I'm gonna open it up for questions. And Angelina has a question for Aurelia and for me. How do you advocate for yourself as a woman of color in corporate tech, especially when facing challenges like being the only woman in a team or feeling unheard? What strategies or tools have helped you navigate biases and make sure your voice is recognized?
Take up space and kill it. Just be excellent at your job. Do it really well, do it really, really thoroughly, and take up space.
Yeah.
I am very, very often the only woman in the room, let alone the only person of color. I don't care. I'm still going to take up space. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it really well.
Yeah, and make them hear you, like make them listen to you, and just repeat it and repeat it if you need to, but yeah, just get out there, like take up space, yeah, like you
And
said.
find good allies. Like we're not alone. Like there's, for everybody who's like attacking DEI, there's a ton of folks that are totally behind it.
Yeah.
So just find your allies. How about you, Ricardo? How do you take up space and be an ally? Because I
As
know
I
how I
mentioned
do.
earlier, I do like to force some people to use my proper name with the right accent under the right scenarios. Just to see how they react. So I put little tests out there to see what the reaction looks like. But something that people don't really know about me is I'm a homosexual man. For the most part, I'm straight passing, straight acting, so folks have no clue. So much so that when I used to work in China, I've had people constantly ask me, how are your wife and kids doing? And I kind of put up with it for a while. And then at some point I said in Mandarin, like, you should ask my boyfriend. And their face just absolute panic. So I think, the way that I kind of show allegiance to the folks that are in the diversity space is just being open by saying, hey, I'm a queer person in the right environments, but making sure that people understand that I carry myself in a certain way for whatever reason, but here are these demographic things about me. In the case of gender specifically, I really only admire the women in my family for as far back as I can look at. So much so that when I was in high school, I won a women's international scholarship because of the essays that I wrote about it, which kind of felt weird taking money from women. It was a little bit awkward, but it made sense. And I mentioned that because when you lead with your truth, people can see that. And people can pick up the value of diversity from that one truth. And then you find commonalities, right? You find commonalities around race, gender, sexuality, disability status. I think my favorite diversity is actually disability as a concept, because the way that I look at disability is that we are all temporarily able, right? Everyone here will eventually become disabled. And so the fact that we don't have a culture in which you view it from that context, in which we're actively thinking, hey, how do we actually make the world better for people who are disabled? It actually takes from us. So when you look at that as a baseline fundamental truth, that we all become this one thing, what's a commonality, then you can work backwards and say, hey, something might have gone wrong in this system that's not allowing us to nurture the goodness that helps those people that got to that status earlier than we did. So I'll just pause there because that's a little bit broader than I'm used to saying.
I love it. That's great. Ricardo, can we end with how you ask people, like an example, or how they react when you ask them to pronounce your name correctly?
Panic.
But can you act it or something like that? Like,
I can't. I'm really bad at acting. That's why I go for authenticity. I can't act for. I can repress, but I can't act.
yeah, I feel like Elsa, it's a very like, like obviously in Spanish it's Elsa, but like Frozen and Disney have changed it to Elsa. So I feel like bad trying to like tell people like, no, my name is Elsa, not Elsa. So I've never done it. And maybe I should.
I'm the opposite. I tell people not to try to say my name correctly because I love hearing Aurelia and I hate hearing how most people say it. I'm like, it's okay. There's a lot of vowels in there. Just say it with the English accent.
Yeah.
But everyone be yourself, do whatever you want to do and go kill it and come back and
Everyone.